Well, tons to talk about. I'm really looking forward to having you here. Obviously, extremely topical news of late with everything that's gone on with the SEC. Paul Graywell was here earlier this morning and talked a little bit about that. And
he's fabulous.
Yeah, a lot of things to talk to you about. But first and foremost, and I've heard you mention this in the past about the work that you've been doing really on behalf of the industry. So I just want to say thank you for fighting a good fight with the SEC, because I think you've done an enormous amount, and there's a lot of people in this room and businesses represented that are slipstream and are slipstreaming behind the work that you guys have done.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, thank you.
So, just comment on that. Our hope has been, and I'm partly doing this gratuitously as a pun, but I hope there really is a ripple effect from that court case. Again, I'm trying to be humorous, but I'm also dead serious. That, like, there's a path that now others can follow, and I think, you know, like, I think Paul and the Coinbase team has done a phenomenal job. But you're already seeing, you know, the judge in that case have some very skeptical questions towards the SEC. That helps all of us. I mean, what Ripple has done, what Coinbase is doing, certainly what Grayscale has done, like, the whole industry needs people to fight the fight. And for a while, you people talk about the SEC was winning everything. They weren't winning. They were bullying people into settlement. That's not a win. That's a loss. That's the other guy caved. And I get, you know, why they say that, but they haven't really won in court.
Yeah. Well, to that point, obviously, some big victories along the journey versus the SEC for both Ripple and then you more recently personally. So just dying to know, how are you thinking about it all?
Well, I am thinking about it. We were talking about this a little bit before we came up here. I didn't know what the wardrobe was going to be for today. You know, San Francisco, New York, usually I wear suits. And I asked the Ripple comms team if I could wear my Halloween costume, because I'm wearing an orange jumpsuit with Bill Hinman's name on it. That was frowned upon by the Ripple comms team, and it's not a good idea. So I started
You're always welcome here to wear whatever you want to wear.
Look, I'm obviously elated. July 13th was the day that the decision was made that the XRP is not a security, which I think was very important for Ripple, very important for the industry. This past, I mean, it was actually 1 week ago today that it was, the SEC decided to dismiss the remaining allegations against Chris Larson and myself, which, you know, the SEC is hard to beat, and you know, that you would expect me to be rather elated about that.
I would be elated.
Yeah, I'm not elated yet. I hope I get there. And I'm actually glad you asked this part, because I want to talk about this a little bit. I'm not elated because I'm angry, and I think we all should be angry. Like, they brought a case against me personally that everyone knew right out of the gates was like, that's a really tough case to win. It's kind of saying, I knew XRP was a security, and then I acted anyway, even though they have emails internally where they didn't know what they were calling it. So, and again, you know, Jay Clayton, who was the chair at the time, you know, he's on video saying that he likes to bring charges against the individuals to pressure them into settling.
On Christmas Day before you resign.
Yeah, exactly, the day before Christmas before he resigned. And think about that comment. So Jay Clayton says, we want to pressure them into settlement. That is called bullying.
Yeah.
That isn't what the law says. That's not going, I mean, the judge in Ripple's case actually said about the SEC, they are not following a, quote, faithful allegiance to the law. I mean, so I'm angry because, like, for 3 years, I've been, my personal reputation, like, I got debanked from multiple banks. I mean, by the way, it is funny, except it fucking sucks.
It's not easy to
So, look, I'm angry because, so this is all, yes, I mean, I'll go to therapy, I'll work through my anger. Look,
let's start today here.
My anger is there's no recourse. This is what I think we all should be angry about. Somebody brings a case, they leave office the next day, they spend millions of our money going after something they knew that they were going to have trouble winning. They were bringing the allegation against me and Chris personally to pressure to settle with the company. And look, it would have been way easier. They did offer Chris, and I think this has sort of been reported already, but they did offer Chris and I a settlement where we would pay a fine and kind of admit or deny or whatever the language is. But they were doing that because they wouldn't settle with the company. So what they want is the headline, and part of the bullying is, hey, if you don't settle, we're going to sue all of you. But if we settle as individuals, the headline for them is CEO and chairman pay X, Y, and Z, but they go after the company. It doesn't look good for the company.
No, it doesn't.
So my anger is I spent 3 years having my reputation dragged through the mud, did tens of millions of dollars of legal fees. Luckily, I was at a company like Ripple who can afford to pay those legal fees, but most people can't do that. And the people who brought the case, Bill Hinman, I mean, even though I'm going to dress up as him for Halloween, that's the only recourse he has. There's no harm to him. There's emails that through the discovery process we find that they knew that they didn't know what XRP was, and yet they're going to say, hey, we're going to sue these guys anyway.
At what point in that journey did you, I mean, one of the things that struck me, watching it as I'll say, an interested party, is that from early on, you appeared to have a very stern desire to really take them on, kick them in the shins, and be prolific about it. And you've been very vocal about your feelings around it. I think most folks would have taken a much softer, kind of behind-the-scenes approach. Part of it's a resource issue, which you've talked about, and you've been fortunate enough, but it's more the resources, right? You have to have not only the confidence that you're right, but also a certain drive that's going to take you to a public forum. Just talk a little bit about at what point was it early on where you said I'm going to make this a fight that's going to be pronounced, that's going to be very visible?
Well, I think once somebody declares war on you, there's only one way to respond. It's with war. And not surprisingly, there's plenty of times. I was kind of kidding about the Halloween outfit, but there's plenty of times that there were tweets that I wanted to write that people are like, hey, you gotta be careful. And then when you really think about it, they are there's no worse. It can't get worse than the SEC. I might as well kick them not just in the shins, a little higher up. It felt to me like it can't get worse. Let's speak our truth. Yeah. And part of my elation, or my lack of elation about having the case dismissed last week was also, to be honest, I kind of always expected this would happen eventually, because I did maybe slightly arrogantly think we were right. And it's still scary though. And there were dark days that maybe will someday be talked about. We knew they were going to sue us for a few weeks before they did it, and Chris Larson and I had some difficult phone calls with just us, kind of and what to do. But once you kind of have the conviction to go all in, you have to stay, right? And you have to kind of fight to death. The other thing I would just say is the last panel was talking about what's going on in the real world right now with Sam Bankman-Fried. And the other thing you got to remember, to my point about no recourse. They were going after Ripple, spending tons of money and energy and distraction going after Ripple for something that we now know from their emails they knew wasn't a great case. And they were meeting with Sam Bankman-Fried with their headline is "We Protect Investors." They had XRP related people who owned XRP saying we want to sue the SEC, yet they were they weren't protecting the FTX investor. I don't know. It's maddening to me that we have a government that is, not in check and not getting better yet. I don't think.
And the other thing I've heard you reference is the fact that leading up to the decision to sue, and we'll move on because there's lots of other stuff to talk about, but that you really went in with an open book, right? Trying to educate them, and they, I'm sure, use that information to turn them against you. That's got to be frustrating as well, to put it mildly.
Yeah. This is, again, some of this has been reported already, but the first meeting I had with the SEC, it was me and David Schwartz, and we didn't take a lawyer. Why do we need a lawyer?
Yeah.
We were totally transparent about what we're doing. It was totally clear how we were using XRP. We were using it as a currency. There was never any, we're not trying to hide anything. The one other quick funny story about this, and I know we can't move on, but there was a Ripple board meeting a year before they sued us, and there was a question strategically okay, should we go in and meet with the SEC? Should we, what should our strategy be? And one of our board members, who remained nameless, says, did you ever see Jurassic Park? Yeah, I saw Jurassic Park. Remember that scene where the kids are hiding in the kitchen and the velociraptor's looking for them? The velociraptors are the SEC. You want to hide. Don't go in. Unfortunately, we didn't take that advice. And but look, and Stu Alradi, our chief legal officer at Ripple, has commented a little bit about this. But one of the most frustrating things is they used our transparency against us. Like, I think the whole industry, if we want to build trust in this industry, we all need to be more transparent.
Right.
And we have said, Ripple, I have said that for a long time. But then when you see a regulator use the transparency, it's like, wait, like, what is going on? And yet the SEC, which begs for transparency from everybody else, won't be transparent themselves.
Do you compare notes ever with Brian Armstrong or folks at Grayscale? Because there's a couple of you that are fighting respective fights, not obviously the same fact patterns, but a couple who have a more pronounced sort of fight going on with the SEC.
Look, I will also, yes is the answer to some degree. I do think the Grayscale, what's going on with Grayscale, the decision that happened there, again, the quote from the judge there, the SEC is being arbitrary and capricious.
Yeah.
I mean, these are federal employees, and we have a federal judge saying that it's just, I think we owe Grayscale a debt of gratitude as the industry too, because it's, I think a little bit like Ripple, they kind of had to fight it, but there is, I think, a friendliness that is increasingly part of, I think, momentum that is building in the industry, where years ago, 5 years ago, I think the religiosity of crypto made it harder, and I think that has thawed also.
Well, there's some common ground being found, right?
There's common ground, and I believe also an acknowledgement, like, it's already $1 trillion category, it's gonna grow. To me, it's not so much about how big is your slice of the pie, it's how big is the pie. And if we can collaborate more than fight each other to make the pie bigger, that's a good thing. I will also say, I'm sure I'm gonna get in trouble for this one.
Sorry, it's a friendly group.
You're my therapist. This is all great. Look, I really think the team Ethereum needs to kind of get into the fold and get away from the maximalism. Like, some of the stuff I see said by key people in the Ethereum ecosystem, I'm like, how is that helping the industry? Like, it's just, it drives me nuts. Because, like, look, we all benefit by growing the pie. And the collaboration with Brian Armstrong, or look, I'm in touch with other notable CEOs, and it's super positive and constructive, except for certain exceptions. I would challenge the industry. Like, look, we need to get rid of the ideology if we want to grow the whole industry and find more common ground. And I think the trend line is really positive on that.
Well said. Let's think about regulation in a global context. Another thing that you've mentioned quite often, and obviously you're doing it, expanding outside the U.S. I think recently obtained a license in Singapore. And we all know, whether you're on the buy or the sell side here, there's positive momentum in the UK, elsewhere in Europe, Dubai, Singapore, even Hong Kong, Japan, in some cases. So what are your thoughts on kind of regulatory arbitrage, rest of the world versus the US? People still look at the US as ultimately the largest TAM for capital markets, payments, et cetera. And will the US catch up here based on your experience, what you're seeing?
Yeah. I think I'm going to zoom out for a minute. I got lucky and was exposed to Bitcoin in 2012. So we kind of been in the industry-ish for 11 years. I've been at Ripple for over, closing on 9 years. I think if you take a really macro view, I'm super optimistic. The US will get there, in part because it's logical. The talk, there's, I think it was this morning, the Wall Street Journal made some comment about how crypto is being used to fund Hamas, and they were quoting Elliptic as the source. And Elliptic is like, no, that's not what we said. Yeah. And there's clearly still a sentiment in the United States that is just anti-crypto. People said when Ripple won the case this summer, has Ripple's U.S. business accelerated? And the honest answer is no. And it's not because, even though Ripple had a win and XRP is deemed to not be a security, the overall posture towards crypto in the United States is still pretty negative. And I think if you zoom out and think about where will that be in 5 years or 10 years, I'm not worried at all. Had you told me 8 years ago when I joined Ripple that the crypto market overall is going to be $1 trillion, I'd been like, whoa, seriously? Right. And so I think that we're going to live through some speed bumps here in the United States. I don't know how long they're going to last. for a minute there, I thought Tom Emmer was going to be Speaker of the House. I was super excited about that. I say that in a positive. Tom Emmer, for those who don't know, is very kind of pro-crypto and constructive with the industry in a really positive way. So I just think over the long arc of time, it'll be okay. And I always remind people, as you already did, the UK, it's not like these are small economies that are crypto friendly. When I say friendly, I don't mean they're looking past things. It's just they provided a set of rules, so we know what the rules of the road are, and we can follow them. But as you said, the UK, UAE, Singapore, Japan, like these aren't small economies. These are big economies. So the US, I think, would get there. I just don't know if it's in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Let's hope you're right. I think a lot of people would like to see that as well. You referenced before Ripple, and I've never, Fred and I have known each other a number of years. I've never asked you about this, but I took note of it at the time. So a slight deviation, the peanut butter manifesto. How do you think about that? I don't know if everybody knows what it is. You can briefly describe it. But just given the global role that you have for a business, and you've got so many different things going on at Ripple, how does that still inform your thinking as a leader? We all are entrepreneurs of sorts here in an emerging industry, and I think about that a lot from a focus standpoint.
So what Jack's referencing is in 2006, I was a senior vice president at Yahoo, and this is when Yahoo was in its heyday. And I wrote this thing called the Peanut Butter Manifesto, which was an internal document which ended up getting published on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, talking about why Yahoo I thought was going to be challenged. And the key thesis was that Yahoo was trying to be everything to everybody and therefore was nothing to anybody. And it was, I used this expression, you're spreading your peanut butter, the investments of where are we going to invest? You invest in the search engine or the content business or fantasy sports or whatever. And it's just like, well, we invested a little bit in everything, so we're kind of shitty at everything. Yeah. And I think it absolutely applies not just to crypto, but any advice I have to give is like, pick something you're going to be great at. And when I got to Ripple, there were 3 different projects internally. There was a smart contracts platform called Codius. There was a identity-based project, I think it was called GlobalID, and then the third one was a payments network, which we now call RippleNet. And one of the first things, the first summer I was there, I was like, look guys, we gotta pick one. We do not have enough resources to prosecute all these things, so let's pick one. And this is before ETH had kind of emerged as the smart contracts platform, so some would say, well, you made the wrong choice. I think it's all worked out okay, but I still subscribe that focus, and one of the most powerful managerial tools is saying no. Right. It's hard as an entrepreneur. Yeah. Sure. Because you never really know when you say no to a customer or no to an opportunity, you don't know if the one you're saying yes to is the right one. Right.
Well, to that end, what are the current big focus and initiatives going on at Ripple? And I know one of the things that we're all striving for, but you guys particularly around real world use cases. And so as you think about the landscape, where's your focus?
So I totally agree with that point. I think what I liked about the last panel was really just this idea, which we as an industry have to get to, what problems are we solving? How are we reducing friction from whatever systems we're going after? Ripple obviously started in the payments market, particularly cross-border payments. That has grown remarkably into billions of dollars of transactions. We very much have viewed ourselves at the infrastructure layer and really an enterprise infrastructure layer. And I believe when you're building a new industry, selling picks and shovels has usually worked pretty well. So we acquired our really first acquisition. We acquired a custody company called Metaco, based out of Switzerland in June. And for us, that's just kind of an extension of, we already sell into financial institutions. Some of them come to us and want custody capabilities, even to use some of our technologies. We were partnering with custody companies, and so we felt like that made sense. I continue to think there's going to be other kind of infrastructure layer pieces. I think the compliance category is super interesting. Ripple's not a principal in that world, but I think what Chainalysis is doing is great. I referenced Elliptic, even though I guess they got misquoted. I think that's a super interesting area as well. And that's kind of where we're focused. The one thing I'll throw out also that we really aren't focused on, but I'm a big advocate of, I think the tokenization of various asset classes is super interesting. But back to the peanut butter thing, the mistake I see some companies making, armchair quarterback, is they're trying to be horizontal and tokenization of lots of things as opposed to, no, pick one industry and go enable tokenization around that industry and benefit from that. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, but it's an industry that I think is super interesting.
Is your worldview, either personally or wearing your Ripple orange jumpsuit, that lots of assets?
No, it's the SEC. You're my therapist.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But do you see this trend? Larry Finks of the world are talking about it. That all assets will ultimately be tokenized, at least from capital markets perspective, and they will be created on chain, they'll be traded on chain, the accounting, the custody, et cetera, will improve liquidity and reduce friction.
I'm a huge believer because of that last thing you just said. You have to start with what is the benefit of doing those things. And I think that what we're going to see more and more is that you can reduce friction. That means that by cost, speed, latency, if you reduce friction, yes to everything you said before.
Right.
To see a guy like Larry Fink, getting back to my earlier comment, he told me 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago when I joined Ripple, that a guy like Larry Fink was going to be talking about how all of these assets are going to be tokenized and it's $30 trillion. I wouldn't have believed you. And so I'm very bullish on that. But I think to do it effectively, you're going to see companies focus on a vertical and become experts at that vertical.
Right. Stablecoin is another big topic. That a lot of people are looking at as one of the primary real world use case right now for digital assets. What's your view there?
I had coffee with a friend right before we did this. We were talking about stablecoins to some degree the best use case of like real utility in the entire crypto industry. I'm very much a believer. I worry a little bit about the regulatory dynamics. In Europe you have MiCA or MiCA, whatever you pronounce it. That has some limitations on stablecoins, which will be interesting to see how that plays out. Tether is an interesting. Ripple uses Tether in some of our customer payment flows, and I'm bullish. I worry a little bit, back to the transparency point. I think Tether would benefit by being even more transparent. And I think you're going to see, I'm not sure if PayPal will be successful, but I think you're going to see other players enter the stablecoin market because you're seeing that the Tethers of the world make a lot of money.
Right.
And I think people look at ways to share that with participants. And as the last panel, there's I think a very salient point that in the US that's hard in terms of how because you don't want to violate various securities laws, but I think I'm very much a believer in the stablecoin market, and I think we'll see it continue to grow.
Given the global nature of the business, what regions around the world are you seeing the most kind of excitement, or both for your business, but just in general in terms of adoption of digital assets, payments, et cetera?
I think it for me it follows some of the regulatory clarity.
Right.
I'm sure in your business as well. You spend time in the UK, and you just have a friendlier tone. Our largest market for RippleNet, the payments network, is Southeast Asia. Certainly, we're seeing strong growth in the Middle East. But a couple of very senior people at Ripple are down in Brazil for this whole week, and I was talking to one of them on the drive in today, and it's like the interest level continues to be very, very, very strong. And I think, as we all would agree, countries with poor monetary policy and thus inflationary fiat currency dynamics is going to continue to drive demand for crypto.
Sure.
And I was, as I'm sure you do, I speak to various audiences. I did a business school class recently, and there were a bunch of crypto skeptics, and it was interesting to me because it correlated with where some of the students were from. Right, there was a couple students from Argentina in the class that are super pro crypto because
inflation hedge, right?
Yeah, in our lifetimes, we're older than some of the audience, but the Argentinian peso has been devalued at least 3 times, it's basically zero.
Yeah.
And if you've lived in that market, you have a different view about crypto than if you grew up in Darien, Connecticut.
Last question, or Topeka.
Or Topeka. Topeka actually has its own problems. Actually, Topeka has shrunk 10% since I've lived
That's
there.
it, yeah. Well, it's because you and Carl left. I have one more question, but then we're going to open it up to you guys. You mentioned earlier the picks and shovels, the infrastructure side of the business. Are there any particular areas on the infrastructure spectrum that you think are linchpins before more institutions kind of gain adoption here or get involved?
I think that's a softball. Custody.
Yeah.
Robust custody. I mean, it still is a factor, and I think we all experience it in various ways. When I say custody, that applies to the infrastructure, like how you custody. I don't mind admitting in front of this audience, I changed my phone number this week. I'm sure a lot of crypto people here, I changed my phone number, like, oh, know what happened there. To me, that's part of the infrastructure. Right. Like, if you have SIM porting continue to be a problem, you're like, oh my God, how are we here? The second one, I think I'm repeating myself, so custody. The second one I say is compliance related pieces. I think Chainalysis is a fabulous company. I think they're doing great stuff. I think continuing to have players like that build, and even for Ripple internally, our compliance capabilities, like we have 5 vendors we have to work with in various pieces, and I feel like there's going to be companies that bring some of that together into a single, more cohesive solution, both for crypto native companies like Ripple, but also for the customers we're increasingly selling into. So those are 2 that I would highlight as precursors. One other thing I'll just say, if there's a third thing, it's not so much a company, but it's almost like the psychology of the crypto industry, I think, has to continue to evolve, because I continue to hear people, fight the fight about KYC or things. It's like, in my attitude, is you're never going to win. It's not about what your ideology is for crypto and anonymity. I respect, and I tend to not comment about my own personal views on that. I'm a pragmatist about building Ripple, and I think we should be pragmatists about seeing the crypto industry evolve. The fundamental regulatory regimes like KYC, AML, they're not going away, and you can fight it all you want, and it will inhibit your growth as a company that's crypto native.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I do think something you mentioned identity before. I think there are some interesting initiatives in identity that might be able to make that a more reasonable process.
For sure.
For people to go through. Let's open it up. Questions? The mic coming there.
Yeah, hi Brad. My name is Suresh Deshani, iChain Capital. So when you're talking about real world assets, it's very interesting what you say that obviously it's a space that needs to happen. And I think the technology is already there. I think the technology can easily do it, the tokenization of trillions. But obviously what's stopping it in the US is all the regulatory hurdles, right? In fact, I think the UK's got better regulations. Germany seems to have better regulations. Dubai has better regulations. So here you need many licenses to even do secondary trading of securities. So you need an ATS license, and then some lawyers were telling us that there are so many others when it just comes to lending against real world assets. So the hurdles are just insurmountable. Any comments on that, and how do people in this room who are mostly based in the US adapt to it?
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts. One is, you use the word insurmountable. They're not insurmountable. It's a big pain in the butt, and it's having the capital to get some of the licensing. But the part of that is having clarity about what the licensing needs to be. But the last thing you also said is for these companies based in the US, look, I have said this publicly before. One of the first pieces of advice I give to an entrepreneur, typically a young entrepreneur coming out of school thinking about starting a company, is I say, don't start in the United States. If there's one thing I could go back and change about Ripple's founding, I wasn't there for the founding, God, had we not incorporated in the United States, so many things would have been better. You would be shocked the amount we pay in taxes. It's just, so the first piece of advice, and by the way, I'm a kid from Kansas, where's Carl? I don't like giving that advice. I view myself as a US, I'm pro-US, but if the US is gonna create a hostile environment for us to build this industry, I mean, yes, the U.S. is the largest TAM, but it's like 23% of global GDP. Well, guess what? There's 77%.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of other very friendly markets. And so part of my answer would be like, why start in the United States? Go somewhere else.
Hey, Brian, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Any update you can share about Ripple IPO process, especially now that the SEC case is.
Yeah.
Your therapist might not say similar answers.
Look, I've commented a little bit on this publicly. You have to kind of zoom out for a second and say, okay, great, we won the case. And remind me who approves an S1? I forget. Oh yeah, the SEC. Right. I said to the same friend I was having coffee with today, I'm not really popular in the SEC building. They don't love me. I kicked him in the shins and I kept going north. And so I don't think it's in the cards in the short term for us to try to get public in the United States. I'm putting a qualifier on there at the end. Look, there's some other pretty liquid capital markets that are friendly towards crypto, and so I wouldn't rule that out. But you also have to remember, some companies are in a hurry to go public because they need to raise capital. And that's not really a key driver for us. I mean, a driver for us is more that we have had investors in the business since 2012 who represent funds that were started in 2010 or 2011 who, that they want to close up their fund, and getting liquidity across our shareholders is a more of a pressing item than raising capital through an IPO. That's a good non-answer. That's a non-answer.
Understood. Thank you.
Question?
So I hope your therapist approves this one. We're pushing Gary Gensler's head. I'm just curious, who or what is he protecting? It's important to say it's retail investors, and then why? What is the motivation? I feel like I have this conversation.
Power. It is. I think it's simply I don't know. Is anybody here based in Washington? All right, I got one person. But I've started spending more time in Washington. I think it's simply a dynamic of how does the SEC, I want to expand, I want to have more power. It's putting the power ahead of sound policy. It's putting politics ahead of innovation in the United States. I think it's abhorrent. I mean, there's a reason why I'm dressing as Halloween I'm not kidding, by the way, I have an orange jumpsuit. It's in the car right now. I don't think there's any altruism in what he's trying to do. It's not coming from how do I protect investors. I mean, think about it. They went after Ripple and they had 75,000 people who hold XRP in the United States trying to sue the SEC. At the same time, literally FTX is whatever the allegations, I don't know, he's testifying today, I don't know what's gonna happen. Well, I think I know what's gonna happen, but Gary Gensler won't, he was called in front of Congress and asked to comment about his meetings with SBF, and he won't comment about it. This is a government, he's a servant to us, right? What is going on? Anyway, I think it's just power, sorry.
Unelected.
Great, you have to wait.
You're next. Can you speak to what the long-term goals of Liquidity Hub are?
Yes. So the question is, Ripple has a product/feature we have built called Liquidity Hub. The nature of one of our products called On-Demand Liquidity, which is part of the RippleNet of moving value across borders efficiently, is sourcing and executing XRP trades, and potentially, as I mentioned, we use Tether in some cases. Doing that as efficiently as possible has an impact on margin. And so we were using kind of third-party players to source and manage that, and we built a set of technologies internally, which first and foremost is really to serve our own needs as a customer. And they were kind of well, wait a minute, we built this kind of cool little contraption here. Are there others in the industry that could benefit from it? And we kind of opened it. It's kind of an Amazon Web Services, AWS strategy of this might have other customers. And so we productized it. I think we announced that in January. It's still early days, so we don't spend a lot of time events like this talking about liquidity hub just because it's kind of, it's still small, but, anything that actually serves Ripple's needs well and efficiently, it's like, well, other customers can benefit from that too, yeah.
Piggybacking off that question, Brad, and congratulations on the recent announcement with Uphold and Ripple. Does that have anything to do with ODL or any operations within the U.S.? Or what's the impact based upon that new partnership?
Well, so, I mean, look, we want to partner with anybody who increases the liquidity in the XRP ecosystem. That's good for Ripple. That's good for everybody else in the ecosystem. Ripple tends to represent, between 1% and 5% of XRP volumes in any given day. The more liquid and the more efficient the market is overall across Uphold and any other, kind of well-regulated, I'll call white hat exchange, that's good for Ripple. It's good for the whole industry. We've worked with Uphold in a few different ways. I'm sure I'm gonna get myself in trouble. I think Uphold actually is going to re-release an XRP rewards card. They have credit cards they do, and our view was, people. I think that's been talked about publicly, but
It has now.
Yeah, I think Uphold
Nobody's recording anything here, by the way.
Well, GlobalID had that first.
Exactly.
Correct. Yeah. So we'll see. I think Uphold's great, been doing well, so we're glad to partner with it.
Thank you.
Got time for one, maybe two more questions. So, do you have one?
I was just wondering, going back to what you said earlier, if you were to start over, it wouldn't be in the U.S. I was wondering what country would you start in?
That's a good question. I mean, the problem is you have to think about what things looked like in 2012 or 2013. That's a great question. I don't have it. I mean, today Singapore would be high on my list, UK would be behind the list, Dubai behind the list. What I don't know is what that looked like in 2012, and so that's it's not a fair. I'm not giving you a fair answer because I'd have to be smarter about what that looked like then.
I guess not back then. If it was today, if you started.
Oh, well, those are the three. Those are the three that I would put first on my list. They all have, to varying degrees, clarity around regulation. Some of them are more tax friendly than others. But you can hire people that are super talented in all those markets, and so any of those three are behind the list.
One more question? Going.
I have a question. How much do you think our lack of regulatory clarity is a gap between reach and grasp by the government, or understanding the space and being able to actually, stitch together rules that make sense? And related to that, where do you see that we will get regulatory clarity versus where things will remain murky?
So I think I'm going to answer the second part first. I might ask you to repeat the first part in a second because I'll forget. But I think that the highest momentum in Washington is around the stablecoin piece, because I think they view it as a threat to monetary policy and the Fed. And I think that has more momentum than the other pieces. There are, I have spent a bunch of time in Washington, and some of the meetings I have it warms my heart because they understand. I mean, I think McHenry, I think Emmer, they understand this stuff, and I don't think they view it as a threat. And I think they see it as an opportunity. Because he asked about Yahoo. I have been involved with the internet since 96, 97. And part of the reason why the United States has benefited on a geopolitical basis is because we are the birthplace of the internet as we know it. And it's partly because there's regulatory clarity that allowed entrepreneurs and investors and capital to flow into that industry. And I think that the blockchain and crypto is another seismic shift like the internet as we know it today. How it plays out over 20, 30 years, we shall see. But the fact that we aren't providing that clarity that we enabled in 1996, I think is hurting us every day. And I think we all should be advocating for that in Washington. But it's hard to get things done in Washington. It's hard to get a Speaker of the House.
That's right. Brad, super grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.